Lapsus is back from vacation. And boy did they come back, this time of an IT and software company known as Globant. We're saying Globant. This is a pretty interesting breach. I've learned a lot about Globant in this video, and we're going to talk about that here in just a minute, because at least for me, they've led to some interesting questions that tie back to some of the previous breaches that we've seen from Lapsus. But again, we're going to discuss that in a moment. We're also going to talk about some of the fallout from the Okta breach. And if you're not familiar with that, there's going to be a playlist linked at the end of this video. It's also down in the description of this video, so do check that out. There's a video on the Okta breach. But we've learned a lot in the following days and weeks following the Okta breach, and we're going to talk about what that means for the state of cybersecurity. Believe me, it's not something that you're going to want to miss. Now let's start with what was posted on the Lapsus Telegram on the night of March 29th. Their first picture was a photo showing a directory. It shows a number of different files, which include a number of different company names. That includes Apple, Alphabet, Arcos Dorados, C-SPAN, DHL, and Facebook. Before we go any further, Lapsus, if you're watching this, get your dirty paws off my C-SPAN. Don't touch C-SPAN, they're precious. They then make a claim about poor security practices at Globant by publishing a number of login credentials for admin accounts, which include credentials for sites like Confluence, Jira, Crucible, and GitHub. Yikes. Obviously, I've censored the passwords, but if you didn't see their post already, take my word for it, a lot of the passwords are repeated and none of them really meet the definition of a good password. Again, I have a video on my channel if you're curious about what a good password looks like. So take a jump, hit that subscribe button, and maybe that video will make its way to your home feed either way. They then proceed to drop a torrent file of about 70 gigabytes, which they say is customer source code from Globant. And this is where things get pretty interesting and not in a good way. Again, like I said, this isn't Globant source code, this is customer source code. Some of that code includes things like API keys, private keys, passwords, and all kinds of other sensitive data. Yikes. And all of this comes a week after a number of teens in the UK were arrested, one of which is claimed to be the ringleader of Lapsus. And that came very shortly after the Okta hack, Okta being an identity and access management company used by a number of organizations around the world. And boy, do we have some things to talk about. Bill Demercopy shared some documentation on Twitter which outlined the timeline of events that took place with the Lapsus breach on Sitel, which is an IT consulting firm that Okta works with. That's believed to be the third-party provider that was targeted by Lapsus and allowed Lapsus to gain access to Okta. From January 16 to January 21st, they were able to go from their first login to their final login. In that time, they did just about everything. They were able to download and utilize off-the-shelf GitHub hacking tools like Process Hacker and Mimikatz, and they were able to use those to disable the FireEye protection and even find an XLS document, wait for it, titled DOM admins-LastPass. Using that, they were able to create a user in the Sitel environment that gave them persistent access. Unreal. Now, there's a lot to talk about. That hack took place in January, and we did not end up hearing about it until mid to late March. So what's with the wait? Well, that's really frankly what we're all asking. No one seems to know an answer. Okta acknowledged in a revised statement, not even their initial statement again in mid-March, that they had identified a breach of a third-party provider, but said that it was contained and they didn't believe there to be any other malicious activity outside of that time. Other than that, they didn't give any further details. As for Sitel, as Bill points out, we didn't get a word from them until March either. And the language used in these statements implies that it's not just Okta that's implicated in this breach. It might actually end up being other organizations as well. Lapsus has done a lot of talking during these breaches. They've gone from basically roasting SOC analysts and security teams of the companies that they've attacked. They've basically made claims that Sitel and Okta and a number of other organizations have had terrible security practices, which again could just be fluff and hearsay, but I mean, they are the ones that breached those companies. Basically saying things like they were able to retrieve passwords from Slack channels, which you don't have to be a security nerd to know that you probably don't want to be storing passwords in chat forums. Needless to say, with every new Lapsus breach, the cybersecurity and really hopefully at least the IT community as a whole is paying attention to this as well. but we're all being left with more and more questions and frankly concerns. That concern is not just for the organizations that have already been breached, but for the potential of other breaches in the future, knowing that it's not necessarily the advanced technical solutions that are being exploited, it's the low-hanging fruit. And we've talked about that on the Cyber Monday show with people like Keith Adams and Dave Kennedy, who have a lot of experience in the industry with a lot of different companies and can really attest to how we're really approaching a pretty large disconnect between the breaking edge solutions that a lot of organizations are trying to implement with security and the really low level security vulnerabilities that really exist that attackers like Lapsus are exploiting. For example, and we're going to use the Sitel breach as an example here, that FireEye tooling that they used didn't really seem to matter because they were able to find clear text passwords, create their own account after socially engineering an employee, it seems, and they were able to turn FireEye off. So again, it really comes down to the people, and we've seen it in this example. This Globant breach has also poured some water on the idea that those arrests in the UK would slow down the operations of Lapsus anytime soon, which honestly, I'm not personally that surprised given that Lapsus appears to be an international organization, and therefore it would probably take an international effort to wrangle the rest of the group. And something like that would take a lot of time and effort, so we'll see how long it takes to get that done. Finally, there's one detail from this breach that I wanted to share. We've already talked about on this channel the EA hack and the Ubisoft claim by Lapsus. We've also talked a little bit with the previous hacks on how Lapsus has demonstrated a willingness to basically target vendors and elements of the IT and software supply chain, and that has given them access to downstream clients. Another example would be a company like Sitel, which gave them access to Okta. With Globant, this might be yet another addition to that vendor targeting list. Guess who works with Globant? EA and Ubisoft. Now, I'm not saying that that's how they were able to gain access to those companies. Frankly, we don't know. It's too early to tell. But I did notice that connection, and I guess time will tell if that is how they were able to gain access to EA and Ubisoft, or if those were separate hacks that took place at separate times using separate means. Them getting access to EA and Ubisoft by way of Globant or another vendor would make a lot of sense, being that it's really preventing them from duplicating efforts multiple times for multiple organizations. They can get multiple organizations for the price of one if they're targeting a vendor or some element up the supply chain. So anyway, that's a lot of information to digest, but if you want to catch up more on the Lapsus breaches, there's a playlist that you can check out right now. It's right here. And if you want a real clean place to get started, check out the video on the arrests that came out last week. That's right there on the top. This playlist is growing quickly, so definitely catch up on the information as soon as possible, because for all I know, we're going to be talking about this all here again in a moment. Until next time, stay safe. Bye.